Hey guys, today I am tackling the topic of arranging music. This is all thanks to my Patreon supporter Marco C, who suggested this topic, so thank you again, Marco. Now, at first, when he mentioned this, I thought this would be like too kind of big and squirrely of an idea, like, I don't have a process, what's there to even talk about? But obviously that's not true. We all have our knowledge and ideas and things that we default to when we're going through a creative process, and why not talk about that? I know that I personally find it really helpful when people talk about whatever their process is for things, even if I don't necessarily connect with each and every idea or find myself using all the different tactics that they mention. I think it's just helpful to know that someone falls back on knowledge or has a system that they go back to, and that it's not just coming out of thin air or being done by magic. So in the spirit of all that, this isn't meant to be a definitive all-encompassing guide by any stretch, but I will touch on some key basic ideas and concepts and things that I think are really important for beginners to know. So hopefully this will be great for you guys, as well as for more advanced players who are just looking for some ideas and maybe are stuck in a rut. So hopefully this will have a little bit of something for everybody. Now, as an aside up front, I am coming at this as a guitarist and as a singer, and from a definitively melody-centric perspective. So I'm not going to touch at all on the more sort of nebulous worlds of EDM or electronic music or anything where melody doesn't really take the forefront. So I do really enjoy those styles of music. It's just not something that I spend a lot of time making. So just know that up front. I like that stuff. We're not going to get into that. In this video, I'll be talking through the knowledge and information that I think is really important to have to better enable you to arrange from scratch, as well as walk you through my arranging approach on a handful of different songs, and towards the end give you some clear, definitive sort of action steps and ideas to take away and try some arranging on your own. As an accompaniment to all of this, I will have an easy-to-follow PDF or printout that will be available for my monthly Patreon backers, as well as being available as a one-time purchase. Because we're covering a lot of topics in this video, timestamps will be in the description below, so feel free to skip ahead to whatever topic you are most interested in. Now, first up, I want to make my case for the importance of theory. If you want to get beyond playing pre-existing arrangements or just grappling in the dark for ideas, having a firm grasp on theory, chord structure, rhythm, and basic sight reading is really going to give you that edge. Having that will allow you to understand what is going on in the arrangements that you already play, which will then allow you to better take ideas out of any given song and repurpose them in your own arrangements. Plus, it'll just make it a lot easier to arrange totally from scratch. Now, having the opportunity to take several semesters of classical theory, jazz harmony, counterpoint, etc. is an awesome luxury, but to be honest, for folks who play in the realms of traditional folk or popular music, you can get a lot of mileage out of books like Music Theory for Dummies or any number of great books from Hal Leonard or Mel Bay. Knowing the fretboard, being able to sight read, even if just very slowly, knowing your circle of fifths, knowing all the flats and sharps of every key, the chord structure of the major and minor scales, understanding triads, seventh chords, sus chords, knowing your modes, and understanding how to transpose with and without a capo, that is all information that you should bake into your brain as much as possible and as quickly as you can. Now, I know that is a very tall order. People study theory for years, but I'm not saying that you should put off arranging until you know all of that. You should be arranging as you go with every little bit of new knowledge that you discover. And I will also admit, I have way more theoretical knowledge than I practically use on a daily basis. Anyone familiar with my style probably has picked up on the fact that I play in the same handful of keys all the time. I use a capo, and I'm not the most adventurous or out there player. Honestly, I could probably stand to stretch my boundaries a little bit. So this is where I let you in on a few things. Most guitarists and other instrumentalists are ultimately going to gravitate towards the keys that work best for their instrument, which is often the keys that have the most open strings for that instrument. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, traditional Irish music is defined by instruments like the uilleann pipes and tin whistle and melodeon, and the limitations of those particular instruments have shaped the sound of Irish music. And more back to guitar, bluegrass and old-time musicians tend to gravitate a lot towards G and C because it really gives you those nice bass runs and the alternating bass that really defines that genre for the instrument of guitar. And especially when you're playing solo, you're going to want to have the fullest arrangement possible. So again, you're going to gravitate towards those keys that have the most open strings, or at least a few open strings, and that tends to be the keys that don't have as many sharps and flats, which is great from a quicker learning perspective. So my takeaway here is this. Learn everything you can. It's great to know it all, but with a capo, here's what I get the most mileage out of. C, G, D, A, and E major scales, A, E, and B minors, knowing the major and minor key chord structures. So your 1 major, 2 minor, 3 minor, 4 major, 5 major, 6 minor, 7 diminished, or in minor, of course, would be 1 minor, 2 diminished, flat 3 major, 4 minor, 5 minor, flat 6 major, flat 7 major. That should not be as hard as that was. In terms of modes, you should again know them all, but the ones that I get the most mileage out of, especially playing Celtic music, are Mixolydian, which is essentially your major key or your major scale with a flat 7, your Aeolian minor, which is your natural minor, and Dorian minor, which is very similar to the natural minor, it just has a raised 6th. Those modes are the most common in Celtic music and in a lot of other music as well. You should also, of course, know your 7th chords, your major 7, minor 7, dominant 7, half diminished 7th, and full diminished 7th. You should know your suspended chords, sus2 and sus4. Learn common chord substitutions like the 6 minor for the 1 or the 4 or your 2 minor for your 4. And you should learn some common progressions beyond just 1, 4, 5. With all of that, you will be able to handle all kinds of music within sort of the pop folk realm, and that alone will get you tons of mileage. And now all that is not even really getting into the realm of jazz theory and harmony, which is a really fun world to get into. I personally don't play a lot of jazz these days, but I do realize that I probably subconsciously benefit from the knowledge that I have from the days when I did play jazz and when I went to Berklee, because obviously so much modern music is related back to jazz in some way, or concepts that started in jazz have trickled their way into other styles like bluegrass. So if it's something that you're interested in, I highly recommend taking a semester or 2 of it. It's a lot of fun. And overall, the TLDR of this section is learn your theory. And if you're the kind of person who has a brain that likes structure and rules, actually, it's kind of a lot of fun. Next up, let's talk about the importance of copying. Now, off the bat, you're probably thinking, hang on, learning an arrangement is not the same thing as actively arranging something, and you are, of course, right. But I wanted to dig into this as a sort of separate topic within this video because I think it's really important, and we all do it when we're learning, but for both beginner to intermediate players, as well as for more advanced players who are maybe struggling to arrange their own pieces or feeling guilty about playing pre-existing arrangements, I really want you to view this learning process or the copying process as something that teaches you to arrange in the same way that it improves your playing. You're likely doing it subconsciously, but especially if you have that theory knowledge that we just discussed, you can and should be actively analyzing what you're playing and pulling ideas and concepts out of other people's arrangements and putting them into your own arranging and composing toolbox. I'm sure anybody who has followed me for a while has noticed I have no compunctions about copying based on my South Wind video or my Do I Ever Cross Your Mind video or Hairs on the Mountain or Carolina in My Mind. I also spent many years playing for weddings, often doing 20 to 40 a year and learning 1 to 2 songs each. So when you're at that volume, you're just not going to take the same kind of creative license with every single song. But here's a quick list of some of the things I've taken from being a copycat. For example, Paul Simon and Bert Jansch songs, I learned picking patterns and arranging ideas and riffs and things that I repurposed in other arrangements. From John Renbourn and Pierre Bensusan's arrangements, I learned that even a really simple melody plus bass line arrangement is very effective, and beyond that you can add guitar specific bits and bobs and flourishes and reharmonizations to make it even more interesting. Honestly, arrangements I've learned from them have served as templates for many other things that I've done. More recently, I learned some Shania Twain songs for a gig, which you might have noticed from some recent videos, and learning those songs kind of gave me some new ideas of using like rhythmic hits and key changes that I just hadn't ever thought to bother working into my own arrangements. So that's stuff that I want to try out now. So at the end of the day, copying serves a really valuable function, and I don't want anybody to feel bad about it or feel like it's cheating. You're learning something along the way, and it's good to value. On another note, I found that even when I try to copy something as closely as possible, there is no way that I ever get it to sound exactly like the original. Ultimately, the timbre of my voice comes through and makes it a little bit distinct, or my rhythmic feel makes it distinct, or whatever, slight adaptations that you make for your own limitations, that all slightly changes the arrangement. And then over time, as you feel more comfortable with the song, you might make more conscious choices, like you might choose to reharmonize something or change the voicing or whatever. And so it's not going to be as deliberate of a process as if you just sat down and said to yourself, I'm going to make a really distinct arrangement of this song, but it is an arrangement in some form over time. So ultimately, this is just an acknowledgement of the importance of learning from others and copying things, challenging yourself with new arrangements and techniques, and importantly, learning how to analyze what you're playing so that you can understand what's going on and adapt it for something new, or change it really conscientiously, or just take licks and ideas and apply them elsewhere. Even if you don't have a lot of theory under your belt yet, you can still do this to the best of your understanding, especially after we take a look at the nuts and bolts. Now, what are the component parts of an arrangement? You might think that a simple monophonic melody on its own is not being arranged, but I would argue that the second that you or any singer or player starts to put deliberate, replicable thought into the phrasing, dynamics, and ornamentation of a melody line or song line, that becomes an arrangement. And honestly, not having a harmonic accompaniment is an arranging choice. Now, the nuts and bolts of any given song are, of course, the melody. This is the relatively static, unchanging part of a song. It's the part that you can copyright. You can't copyright a progression alone. If I were to take All You Need Is Love and reharmonize every chord and somehow put it in 7/8, you would still know it was All You Need Is Love because of the melody. Then of course there's the harmony, which is usually comprised of your bass lines and your chord tones and the treble and the mids, and this could be spread out over an entire horn section or string section, or it can be condensed down onto one instrument like guitar or piano. Then of course there is the rhythm, both of the melody and the accompaniment, and that can of course dramatically change the overall character of an arrangement. Then, of course, the extended or optional concepts that can make an arrangement more interesting include things like your intros and outros, which are often fragments of the melody adapted, your taglines, melodic or harmonic fragments or riffs derived or composed to go in between the verses, instrumentals, which can be entirely newly composed or just the melody rehashed on a different instrument, your ornamentation, your dynamics, and I'm sure there's something else that I'm forgetting, but that's sort of the stuff that's most present on my mind. All of that, and then coming at this as a guitarist and singer who plays both solo and in group settings, that means there's a wide variety of arranging possibilities for any given piece, which leads me to thinking about everything that I play. I realized that I could subdivide all the different songs and performances into roughly 4 categories, and each category has a distinct set of considerations and approaches. For example, there's arranging a solo guitar part to support my voice, and in that case, my voice is playing the melody, so the guitar is entirely focused on the harmony and the rhythm, typically playing a strong bass line and full chords, and maybe shadowing parts of the melody here and there. So even though the guitar in this situation is taking a supporting role to my voice, I still want it to be sufficiently interesting to make up for the fact that I don't have a fiddler or mandolin player playing fills and melody lines to add extra interest to the whole arrangement. So with these songs, I like to make sure that I have a clearly defined intro, either a riff or it could just be a partial version of the chord melody or a full chord melody. On a shorter song with 2 to 5 verses, I usually want to have a nice full instrumental, typically a full chord melody instrumental, which is how I arrange things like Lovely Molly, When I Was Not But Sweet 16, Oh Me Wise, among others. And on a longer ballad like Fair Annie, which has a ton of verses, I wanted to keep the focus on the storyline and the lyrics, so I didn't go overboard with any fancy arranging there. I just tried to make the part kind of sufficiently interesting, add some extra texture, but there's no instrumental in that one. It's just all riffs, basically. The next category is arranging an instrumental guitar tune, where the guitar is covering all the bases, melody, bass, and as many filler chord notes as possible. This is the case with arrangements like Plank Steve Davis, She Begs She More, and any of my original instrumental tunes like Renly's Waltz, etc. And in a lot of ways, this is sort of more complicated than just accompanying myself on guitar, because when you are having the guitar play all of those voices, you're going to have to make some sacrifices, because you're going to have to prioritize the melody, which is going to limit whatever other chord tones or bass lines you're going to get. And having to think about that all at once, I find actually more challenging than just accompanying my voice. The third category is arranging a vocal song to leave space for bandmates to supply the fills and the instrumentals. So in that case, the guitar is really reduced down to a purely rhythmic and harmonic role, often playing just straightforward simple chords like boom chuck, such as in Last of My Kind or Ophelia or some of my other songs along those lines. And those songs, if I were to just take out everybody else and just play what I was playing, it might sound a little bit boring and simple on its own. So as I've been doing more of those songs in solo settings, I've been trying to get better about adding in my own instrumentals and fills while I'm playing and supplying all the rhythm, which is a new challenge and definitely a fun one, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. The last category is the more on-the-fly arranging that I do in Celtic settings, like at sessions and things like that. And you can hear some of that on my videos like the Sunny Hills of Barra or the Mulcreavy's March set. Now, in that setting, I'm really adding to and supporting the rhythm. I'm trying to pick up on the implied harmony, add some structure, maybe, kind of create some arc to the tune, like the overall harmonic resolution of a tune. But ultimately it's a little bit more on the fly. Sometimes we do, like, I will get together with friends and we will arrange something more deliberately, but what I'm kind of talking about here is just the more on the fly aspect of it. So that's kind of its own whole separate topic, like the whole concept of accompanying in Celtic tunes that kind of goes beyond the scope of this particular video, but just know that I do kind of think of that as a separate arranging subset. You could also apply a sort of spectrum of difficulty across any of those categories, ranging from copying, such as what I did with Caroline in My Mind or Hares on the Mountain, where I was really just trying to reproduce what I heard as happening in the original as closely as possible, to the other end of the spectrum with Fair Annie, where I really took a heavy creative hand to that song, changed, adapted the lyrics, changed the melody, created my own chord progression, and really created something that doesn't sound like anybody else's version of that song. So there's a wide range of techniques and thoughts that go into that. Now, a little sidebar here. I'm guessing that many folks watching this video are probably folks who primarily play solo, and so you might be inclined to overlook categories 3 and 4. But I will say, I think playing with other people serves a really valuable function for your solo playing and arranging as well. It's great for your playing to have one clear role, especially in a style that has a defined sound, so that you know, okay, that is what my guitar's job is here. Play the boom chuck or play the jig down, up, down, whatever it is, keep it simple. And also B, when you're playing solo, you're often trying to mimic the kinds of arrangements that happen in a group. So spending time in a group and hearing how a fiddler plays an instrumental or how a mandolin player adds a fill can inform your solo playing too. Plus, it's just fun. I have a thought for a future video kind of about this topic of getting out and playing in social music settings, so if it's something that you might be interested in, let me know in the comments. All that finally leads me to what is my process for arranging. The starting point, of course, is going to be what key do you choose and what tuning do you put yourself in. Some considerations for that are going to be, if it's a vocal song, obviously your vocal range is going to be the deciding factor. On one end, for an unaccompanied Irish song, I will just gravitate towards whatever key is best for me, no consideration at all for what might be better for other instruments. If it's an F sharp, totally fine. Though, to be honest, I don't think I've ever done anything in F sharp. But if it's a song that I want to be able to play with other folks, I do keep in mind the ranges and the preferred keys of the folks I'm going to be playing with. Additionally, I might play something in a lower key by myself, but I might play it in a higher key with other folks where I want my voice to really pop out against harmonies. For example, I do a lot in A, but sometimes it's really helpful to pitch it up to B. That way, again, my voice really kind of cuts through over some nice harmony vocals. If it's an instrumental traditional tune, do I want to keep it in the original key? The deciding factor there will be, do I want to be able to play it with other people who will already know it in one particular key or the other? If that's not a concern, is there a key or tuning that the melody sits better in due to range, chord voicing possibilities, and potential for open strings and hammer-ons? So ultimately, this is just going to be a phase of trial and error, where initially I might learn the melody note for note from, say, a fiddle or flute player and play it in the original key, and then from there start to experiment. Maybe bring it up or down a fourth or fifth, say if it's in D, try it in G, or try it in C. If it's in D, try it in dadgad, try it just in drop D, try it in whatever other tunings you might think of, and just sort of see what works best for you. Now, most of the time I do default to standard or drop D because I don't like to have to tune a lot during my performances, but if I'm hitting snags with a particular arrangement, I will start to mess around and see, does this tune in D work better with dadgad? Or if it's in G, is it better in open G tuning? Or if it's a great C tune, is it really nice in C tuning? Or if it's a great D tune, will it sound really nice in C and C tuning, etc. It's just trial and error to see what works best. Now, going back to vocal songs, having a capo opens up a lot of possibilities for us, and personally I do a lot of songs in A or B flat, which means that I have the options of either playing things out of the A chord shapes or capoing up to the second or third fret and playing out of the G chord shapes. And which one I decide on just kind of depends on what set of voicings I like better. Honestly, I tend to find that G works really well for a lot of chord melody stuff, so I gravitate a lot towards G, but sometimes it's nice to play out of A and have that nice rich E chord. Another factor too is the mode. So if something is an A mixolydian where you've got an A to a G chord, it's nice to play it with out of the A chords because you get that full A as well as the nice like G5 sound versus, you know, playing it out of G chords and having G and then F either barred or up high. So those little things like that, it's just a little bit of a matter of preference, but again, it's just a little bit of trial and error here and there within a pretty limited range of possibilities. Now, once I've settled on all of that, my first priority will be perfecting the melody in isolation, either playing it or singing it. And in this phase, I'll also be thinking about how I want to ornament it. Now, with singing something, my choice of ornaments is going to depend on the end goal arrangement. So if I'm doing something totally unaccompanied by myself, I'm going to go to town on ornaments because that's the time to do that. That's the one thing I'm doing and I'm just singing. I'm going to add in all the flourishes I can. But if I'm doing something with guitar, I'm going to pare it down a little bit. That way the guitar has some more space and that way I'm not muddying up the waters with a steady beat behind it. And then even further, if I'm doing something where I have folks harmonizing with me, especially on a chorus, I'm really going to back off ornaments there. That way it's a little bit easier to match up with my voice. Now with instrumental pieces, I find that my process of deciding on ornaments does overlap a bit with my process of deciding what chords I want to play because they're both going to limit each other a little bit. So it's going to be tough to pull off certain ornaments while fretting certain chords. So there's just a little bit of back and forth as you figure out which ones you really want to prioritize at different points in time. So this goes hand in hand with the next step. So speaking of that next step, picking your chord progression. Considerations here include, is there already a standard progression that you can use? And is it in your best interest to use it? If you plan on taking this particular song to jams where other people can jump in and join you, I would say yes, stick with the standard progression. You don't need to reinvent the wheel here. But that doesn't mean that you can't do some tweaking here and there, especially if it's a relatively small change that you can explain easily before you start the song. For example, on the song Rock, Salt, and Nails, which is a great song that has, in some settings, just 3 chords, goes to the 1, the 4, and the 6 minor, I like to throw in a flat 7 on the final line in place of the 4, or kind of where the 4 is, and then it goes to the 4 before going back to the 1. So that's a relatively easy and quick thing to communicate to people. It doesn't really throw them off too much. So that's one of those little changes that I like to go with. Now, if I'm arranging something like a traditional Celtic tune or song where there isn't necessarily a clear chord progression set in stone, my starting point is going to be to look for the implied harmony of that piece. So first off, looking for where the melody clearly calls for the 1, the 4, and the 5 if it's major, or the 1 minor, flat major, or flat 7 major, and 4 major or minor if it's a minor key song. And then after that, looking for places where the melody really maybe wants to have one of the non-tonic subdominant or dominant chords. Like, it's a little bit less common, but sometimes there are spots in melodies where you're like, that definitely sounds like a 6 minor or a 2 minor or something like that. So the first process is just looking for what the tune really clearly calls for. So at this point in the process, whether I am working with a song that has a set chord progression or one that I have derived the chord progression from the implied harmony, I will go back and look for opportunities for reharmonization. So this is a great point to talk about Wild Mountain Thyme, which is a great old traditional song that sounds perfectly adequate, backed by even just 2 chords, the 1 and the 4. You could throw in a 5. That's all it really needs or requires. So it sounds like this with just those chords. Oh, the summertime is coming, and the trees are sweetly blooming, and the wild mountain thyme grows around the purple heather. Will you go, lassie, go? But it gets so much more interesting when you add in all the diatonic minor chords, and those really only come in the second half. So I'll go back to the middle of the verse there. And the wild mountain thyme grows around the purple heather. Will you go? Or grows around the purple heather. Will you go? There are a lot of different ways you can sort of time the chords in there, but it really gets so much richer with those minor chords. So it's one of those things where not every song is going to call for that as much. I think the melody really does suit those chords particularly well. maybe more naturally in some cases than some other reharmonizations might, but it's something definitely to experiment with on other songs. Now, if you want to add some non-diatonic but still stylistically appropriate flavor, I'm a big fan of subbing in a flat 7 chord into a fully major key song like this one, and it particularly works well here because you can throw it in where that 2 minor lands, and because the flat 7 major, in this case F major, F-A-C, shares 2 notes with A-C-E of the A minor, so it works pretty nicely, and the melody is hitting that nice big C, so either chord works, and it sounds like this. And the wild mountain thyme grows around the purple heather. Will you go? So there's some different options there. Obviously, you don't have to take all of those, but if you like sounds like that, you can sort of play around with things and see what works. This is, of course, also a great time to look up other versions and see what other people have done with that song, especially these old traditional songs. They've been done a million times. You can steal ideas from other people and throw them into your own arrangements again, because, like I said, nothing wrong with copying. At this point, after that whole process, you have the bare bones of a perfectly workable arrangement, especially if it's one that you plan to bring to a group setting where other folks will be providing the fills and instrumentals. So at this point, you'll sit down with another musician or two and decide what the intro is going to be. For an example, on a song like Rock, Salt, and Nails I've been playing a lot lately, the verse form is quite long, so a typical quick, easy intro would be to take the second half of a verse form, have the fiddle or the melody or the mandolin play it, and that's how the song gets kicked off, and then I launch into verse 1. From there, it's all about deciding how to parse out your solos. So in a relatively small group, I might go from verse 1 straight into verse 2, and then give somebody a solo after that, sing verse 3, give another person a solo after that, verse 4, and then outro. But if I'm playing with a bigger group and I want to give as many people solos as possible, then I might take a verse form and sort of split it in half and give one person a solo over the first half and then another person a solo over the second half, and do that between every set of verses. So then you end up with potentially 6 different solos over the course of that song. Then at the end, after wrapping up verse 4, the classic move would be to tag the last line, and I like to try to find a way to vary the melody a little bit and maybe add in a rhythmic hit to really accent the fact that it's the end. So that ends up sounding something like, if the ladies were squirrels, with her high bushy tails, I'd load up my shotgun with rock, salt, and I'd load up my shotgun with rock, salt, and nails. I'm not reinventing the wheel. I'm just taking ideas and tropes that I've heard other people do and just working them into my own arrangement here. If I'm playing something solo or just wanting to take a more creative approach to a song, this is a time where I'll go back to the nuts and bolts a little bit and think about all the different ways I can adapt those elements to just guitar and just voice. So this is a good time to ask, what role do I want the guitar to play? Do I want to be doing a flat-picked strumming kind of a thing, like, or do I want it to be a rhythmic Travis picking kind of a thing? Or do I want a more ethereal, lighter, kind of more generic fingerstyle approach? And is there some bass line motion that I can add? It doesn't have to be super complex, just a little bit of movement, as you hear in Blue Mountain. My home's down in Texas, my past you must not know, for I seek a refuge from the law, where the sage and the pinyon grows. Just those little things like that to make it a little bit more interesting. For my intro, outro, and instrumental, do I want them to be just straightforward fragments or full renditions of the melody, or do I want to compose something new for this particular song? Honestly, I tend to fall back on just doing the melody because no one's ever mad to hear the melody again. But this is a good place to exercise some creativity and to maybe arrange like a little counter thing that is distinct from the melody or derives the rhythm from the melody or something like that, or uses the same progression or maybe a different progression. But there are a lot of different ways you can sort of approach that. Now, personally, I find playing chord melody arrangements to be a lot easier with fingerstyle than with a flat pick, but lately I have been enjoying the challenge of adapting my flat pick songs to working in some instrumental melody stuff by myself. And basically that just involves figuring out where the melody lies, and you might have already done that when you're deciding on your key, and then figuring out a way to phrase it so that it's interesting on guitar and in a way that you can keep the rhythm going. So for example, with Willow Garden, I introduced the melody in the bass in the intro. And then I bring it back for the instrumental in the mids. Yeah, that's fairly straightforward. I'm just playing the melody. I'm not reinventing the wheel once again. Just trying to find little ways to make it interesting for myself. Another more modern example is the Stable Song by Gregory Alan Isakov. The melody sits really nicely in the trebles if you're playing out of G chords like I do. Obviously, if you're not constraining yourself to the existing melody, you can experiment around and maybe create a new sort of melody based on the rhythm of the original melody. So, I don't know. It's just trial and error to see what you like. All right, so before I try to take everything that I've talked about and reduce it down to some key takeaways, I wanted to show you guys a song that is very much still in progress. I have not settled on the arrangement for this one at all, and that is Craigie Hill. So this is one that I really love to sing unaccompanied. It's a great showpiece for vocal ornamentation, and I actually released it last month as my monthly unaccompanied song. But I also really love the accompanied versions of this, with Dolores Keane's version being especially high on my list. In this video, it's relatively lively, and there's a steady stream of eighth notes on the bouzouki that I feel like really drives it forward in this very satisfying way, so my initial thought was, maybe I'll try to replicate that on guitar. It being in spring, when the small birds were singing, down by yon shady arbor, I carelessly did stray. The thrushes, they were warbling, the violets were charming, to view fond lovers talking, a while I did delay. But then I heard Kareem Polwarth's version with her unique phrasing and this wonderful sparse piano by Dave Milligan, and I thought, shoot, maybe I want to do something more like that. Something along the lines of like, it being in spring, when the small birds were singing, down by yon shady arbor, I carelessly did stray. The thrushes, they were warbling, the violets were charming, to view fond lovers talking, a while I did delay. Kind of winging it on that last one, kind of just loosely going off of what I knew the harmony wanted to do and trying to add in some other flavors that I didn't use in the first one. But ultimately, yeah, hearing Kareem's version and hearing other versions gives you more food for thought, and I wanted to try something a little bit different, and honestly, I might do that song differently in different settings. So at a session, I might do it more like the Dolores style, a little bit faster, more upbeat. That way it's easier to follow along with for other musicians. But for my own personal version that I maybe release here on YouTube or on an album, I might bring it down to that more kind of interpretive Kareem style of thing and maybe blend the two, who knows? So Obviously, there are a lot of different ways you can approach a song, and I thought maybe sharing a little bit of my personal process in this particular moment might add some extra insight to this video, so hopefully you enjoyed that. So yeah, that's a ton of information. If you haven't been taking notes this whole time, be sure to go download that reference PDF over on Patreon. But just to quickly review, number one, learn your theory. Learn your basic triads and seventh chords, at least in the keys of C, G, D, A, and E. Learn your modes, especially Ionian, Dorian, Mixolydian, Aeolian. Learn your seventh and your sus chords. Learn how to transpose both with and without a capo. Number two, copy and analyze. Every time you learn a new song, sit down and separate out the component parts and see if there's a picking or strumming pattern or rhythmic hits or an instrumental concept that you can take and adapt for another song. Number three, remember the nuts and bolts, your melody, your harmony, and your bass lines, and of course your rhythm. Number four, conscientiously ask yourself what style and approach you want to take to a song and what role you want the guitar to play. Number five, choose your key based on the factors that we discussed, not just optimizing for your guitar and voice, but also considering adaptability for group settings. Number six, settle on your chord progression, either by using the standard setting or by deriving the implied chords from the melody, perhaps adding in some creative substitutions or reharmonizations. And then number seven, work in all that additional stuff. Ornamentation, dynamics, intros and outros, taglines, instrumentals, etc., based on whether you're playing solo or in a group setting. All right, I think I covered it all, or at least everything that I think about actively in my arranging process, but if you have more questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below so we can keep the conversation going. If you're enjoying this kind of educational content and you're looking for some more personalized help, I do teach private lessons via Zoom, so feel free to reach out to me at elstraw.music@gmail.com to learn more. If you're not already with me over on Patreon, you can join me there for early access to these videos, as well as a couple transcriptions each month, monthly news and updates, bonus content, and more. And of course, thank you so much to everybody who already backs me there. Your support means so much and makes these videos possible. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week with a new music video.